Good evening. Good evening and welcome to this special Q&A same-sex marriage debate. I'm Tony Jones, here to answer your questions and debate them. Anglican Archbishop Glenn Davies, who believes marriage was designed by God to join men and women. Actress, author and marriage equality advocate Magda Szubanski. No campaign spokesperson Karina Okotel. And yes, voting Catholic intellectual Father Frank Brennan. Please welcome our panel. Now, Q&A is live across Australia on ABC TV, iView and News Radio at 9:35 Eastern Daylight Saving Time, and you can stream us around the world on YouTube, Facebook and Periscope. We've asked tonight's panellists to keep their answers short, and we will cut them off if they speak for too long to ensure both sides get a fair go. We'll go straight to our first question. It's from Matthew Robson.
Hello, everyone. My question's for Magda.
Sorry, I can't see where you are. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Yeah.
Hello.
Yep, hi.
I decided to vote no in the plebiscite. And when talking to my friends who are also voting no, one fact is really clear, and that is that those who vote yes continually tell no voters that we are haters and bigots for our views. Friends of mine are scared to give their opinions. I don't hate anyone. I just have a difference of opinion on how marriage is bigot.
You totally do, and I wouldn't brand you as a homophobe. I think that there are some people who genuinely really have issues with LGBTQI people, but I certainly wouldn't say that all people who vote no are homophobes. Some time ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when I was very unresolved and probably not comfortable with myself, I might have voted no too. I've gone on a real journey with this, and it's been through being in relationships and seeing my friends in relationships that I've realised there is no difference between my straight friends' relationships and my gay friends' relationships. And so for me, it just seems a natural progression of that, and it's really through experience. So there's been viciousness on the extremes of either side. I deplore that on either side. But I can tell you certainly that I know of people also who come from very conservative communities who are terrified to say that they would vote yes. So I think we have to try and establish and expand the moderate live and let live middle ground, really.
I'll quickly go back to Matthew. Have you had personal experience of being branded a bigot, Matthew?
Yes, in certain situations, yes. I catch a lot of public transport, and I'm doing a uni course this year. So being in that university environment, there's lots of discussions there where you are instantly shut down for any opinion that isn't a progressive one.
Glenn Davies.
It's awful to be called names and to be called a homophobe or a bigot, and I sympathise with that. But it's also awful to have hate on the other side. And as I think Magda rightly says, there's been extremists on both sides and people doing hateful things. In a church down in Melbourne recently, there were awful graffiti about bomb the bigots, or or crucify the bigots, I think it was, and had a swastika and a cross being equal. But likewise, and I think it's true that some people on the no, those traditional people believe in marriage, have unwisely offended and vilified people who are from the LGBTQI community. Well, and I think that needs to be recognised.
Well, there's been a very lopsided sort of opinion that the yes vote's a bully, and that we are saying things that... we've been very quiet about that because we don't want to give airspace, but I can tell you, I can match you and then some for the abuse that I've received, and many people in the Yes campaign for years. I mean, get AIDS and die pervert, you're a pedophile. It has been very nasty on the extremes, and generally we don't give air to that, but I do feel I have to correct this lopsided perception that the yes are bullies. I really think that's not fair, and we haven't spoken a lot about it, but it does need to be corrected.
Here briefly from all the panellists on this, Karina.
Firstly, I must say that the views that I express are my own and they don't represent those of my employer, Victoria Legal Aid. But thank you for your question. Everybody that I've met that has campaigned for the no side has told me that they've experienced abuse. I myself have experienced abuse, and that ranges from being called a homophobe and a bigot. A lady I met just on Saturday said that when she was out door knocking, she was licked on the face 4 times by a stranger. Really strange types of abuse, including, for me, what's got to be the weirdest was someone who drove past myself, and there was another lady from Chinese background, and they yelled out, yes to same-sex marriage, no to immigration. I mean, all kinds of abuse.
Frank Brennan.
I think there have been a lot of passions about this issue, in part because I don't think we should have been having a plebiscite in the first place. But anyway, it's here. And I think the thing is, it's time for us now to all be respectful. I've been in the public square for some years. Prior to this, I think the WIC debate was probably the most vitriolic one that I was involved in. But there seems to be much more personal stuff at play in this, and I even had the experience today, the staff in my office getting lots of phone calls abusing them even, which I think is very sad. So,
because you're voting yes?
Because I'm a Catholic priest and voting yes.
Right.
And here we are, we can come together, we can be civilised. I mean, Karina and I can have all sorts of disagreements, but we can be perfectly charming to each other.
OK, well, let's continue the charm offensive and we'll go to our next question. It's from Craig Mack.
So this is a question that's open to the panel. We're being told that traditional marriage is under attack, but the definition of marriage is constantly evolving. Until 1961, each state had their own laws, and in some of those states, the minimum age for marriage for girls was 12 years old. I mean, I'm glad that marriage has been redefined from that. The Marriage Act itself has been amended twice, once in 1985 and the last time in 2004 when same-sex couples were deliberately excluded. So traditional marriage as we know it has only been around for 13 years in Australia. If anything seems traditional about the definition of marriage, it's that it evolves with the changing values of our society. So we've had a lot of changes in the past. What's so wrong about an evolution to same-sex marriage?
Glenn Davies, start with you.
Thank you. I missed your name, sorry?
Craig Mack.
Craig, thank you for that question, Craig. And it sounds at a technical level, you may be right, but at a fundamental level, I think I'd probably disagree. In as much as the one man and a woman was back in 1961. I think that's Section 48 or 46 of the Marriage Act, which is what the celebrant said to the marriage couple. And it was only in 2004 when the Howard government put the words which are actually in that section into a clause of definition.
Without a plebiscite?
Without a plebiscite.
Let's just get this right. So it's a 2004 amendment, the John Howard government. It was known as subsection 5.1, and it states marriage means the union of a man and a woman. It goes on to say certain unions are not marriages, a man and another man, a woman and another woman.
Correct.
As Magda says, done without a plebiscite.
Yes, and done with bipartisan approval too, by the government.
That's right.
Because that is what marriage has always been. Now, it's true that marriage has evolved in terms of the way in which a woman might be given to a man, and dowries and a whole range of things like that. But what has not changed has been the single man and the single woman coming together in a lifelong union. That hasn't changed over time. And what we're seeing now, there's been a push to take gender out of marriage, and that, for me, is a very serious issue, and one that, despite the panellists' view, I think is such an important matter, addressing the very fabric of our society, that getting the people's opinion is a very important and worthwhile thing to do, rather than just leaving it in the hands of parliamentarians.
Now that's your minute, a bit more than that,
Sorry?
Just to let you know. So that we
thank
get
you.
that set in place. We'll come to some of those issues in more detail. Magda, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. So up until 1966, there was a marriage bar, and married women were not allowed to work in the Commonwealth Public Service. Now, I'm sure that, Karina, you would have benefited from that change to marriage. In 1973, we were allowed civil celebrants. 74.9% of Australians marry outside the church, are married by civil celebrants. So these changes have been in keeping with the consensus of the Australian public and the move forward and the will of the people. So obviously that's your view, that it's a traditional, that the traditional marriage is between a man and a woman. But I would say that really there has not been the understanding and acquaintance with the very solid, very long-term commitments that gay people have made to one another. And I tell you, having experience of both and personally and seeing both, there is no difference. There really is no... If what you're concerned about is stability, is commitment, is loving, is caring, anything else is purely about the sex, which it seems to me, quite frankly, the religious people are far more concerned about than I would have thought they would be.
Karina, come to you, and we should state that you're a member of the Liberal Party. Are you more akin to the John Howard version of the Liberal Party? Indeed I am.
And I respectfully disagree that marriage has been changing. For as long as we know in human history and right across the world, marriage has always been, as traditionally defined in our Marriage Act, as between a man and a woman. And to change it, to change something that has existed for so long, is not without consequence. You can't change an institution that has always existed without there being consequences. Only 24 countries in the world have legalised same-sex marriage, and that's only started happening since 2001.
Can I just put a perspective on that?
Short amount of history from which to look upon to see what those consequences are. But when we look around the world at those 24 countries that have legalised same-sex marriage, there are indeed consequences, and that's what I'm concerned about.
Maybe you...
Yeah. And I'm only saying this because we were told to just not make it speech. But anyway, just to put a perspective on that, you may say only 24 countries. 1 billion people, 1 in 7 people live in countries where there are same-sex marriage. 1 billion out of the 7 billion people. So to say that it's a small amount of people and we don't have experience and we don't know what we're talking about, 1 billion people are living in countries where there's same-sex marriage, and you've managed to bring up a handful of alleged consequences out of those 1 billion people.
I haven't got to the part of where I talk about the consequences, because I think a lot of Yes campaigners do say that there are no consequences, that it's few and remote.
We will come back to the allegations.
I got a list.
Katrina Handley has a question.
Thank you very much. This is regarding a comment that you made, or that was printed on your behalf, Magda, here, where it said that equality before the law is an absolute foundation of democracy. And I agree 100%. I absolutely agree with that. But I have a different way of kind of viewing that, of how we achieve that. And I do understand that there have been changes to the marriage laws. Growing up as a teenager through the 60s and 70s, and revolutions and things that took place, and where the conventional marriages then changed to just where de facto relationships started to be accepted in heterosexual society. And that's gone on. And so we've had, now changes where we've got heterosexual and homosexual de facto and civil unions. So the laws have changed a lot, but there is still not that equality for hetero and homosexual couples.
I'm going to get you to jump to your question, because you're dangerously like a panellist right now.
So, so it's not equal in that regard. So my question is that how I'm looking at it is, can we look at changing the laws regarding de facto civil unions for both hetero and homosexual couples so that they are equal with married couples of heterosexuals, maintaining that? So we've got the married couples, male and female, and marriage remains that, and civil unions and de facto have equal standing in the law to that.
I'm actually going to start with Frank on this, because we didn't hear you on the last question. What do you think? I mean, this is the third way. It's not available in the plebiscite.
I used to be in favour of civil unions, and particularly when they brought them in the United Kingdom, and I thought maybe that's the way to go. And I thought it helped to separate out religious notions of marriage from a civil institution. But in about 2011-12, I think all that started to change. You might remember in my old home state, Queensland, I think the Labor government had set up civil unions. But then when Campbell Newman got elected, the Catholic Archbishop publicly said you should get rid of civil unions because that's a slippery slope to civil marriage. Well, it seemed to me then it was going to be a winner-take-all. And I must say that helped change my view, that I didn't think civil unions was quite the answer. But also it got me thinking that I don't think this is really just about a word, whether it's civil union or marriage or whatever. I think it's more about have we as a society come to move beyond what I would call acceptance and tolerance of people like Magda and their relationships to respect for and endorsement of those relationships. And I think that's where we're at the moment, so that the civil unions thing, I don't think cuts it any longer.
Okay.
And so I think it's marriage
Can I
or
quickly
nothing.
address too the issue that we absolutely do not, and the points have been made that we have the same rights with civil registrations. We don't. We don't have them in every state. There are different names. Functionally, there are all sorts of disadvantages. So we don't have the same protections, and that is a big part. But the other is the symbolic matter of marriage, which I don't want to keep going on. I want other people to speak. So
Glenn, I'll hear you on this first.
Yes, I think that there are differences in the states, and I think what we've suggested, and I've suggested some time ago, is it ought to be a Commonwealth legislation, so that the Commonwealth legislation, and that would then trump the state legislation and territory legislation with regard to a civil union, so that people could be in those relationships and develop those friendships and love. Which they have, yes, friendship and love. So that would be, and that could be for a whole range of civil unions too, not necessarily just based upon the sexual union of the couple.
Glenn, the horse has bolted on this, hasn't it? I mean, what people are voting on right now is a marriage.
Correct, but I think that if that had been addressed properly, and I don't think that still could be addressed, and we don't know what the postal vote's going to provide.
You're still sending a very clear message of equal but different. It's the paternalistic thing, and it's like the Brownlow medal. So if someone wins the Brownlow medal, they win the Brownlow medal. What would you say to a gay player, assuming there is an AFL gay player, that they win the Brownlow medal, but we're going to call it the civil acknowledgement of your very excellent effort? You know, believe me, this is coming on the tail end of the oppressions that we've been through, and I don't want to come across as a whinger, but we have to acknowledge the history of this. What it would mean to us to be fully acknowledged. I don't know if you can really understand after the bashings, the discriminations, the discrimination in employment, the murders. This isn't just out of the blue. I mean, it comes within an historical context. How would you feel if Sri Lankan people were told that you can't be married?
I'm going to throw it to Karina right now because your minute is up. Go ahead.
I think definitely, Magda, what you say about what's occurred in the past and abuses towards gay and lesbian people in the past is something that is deplorable, and we should all acknowledge that that was wrong. That was wrong. I do think that currently there is equality under the law in the sense that in 2007, the Human Rights Commission handed down a report identifying areas of inequality under the law, and the following year, in 2008, the government put through 85 legislative changes to rectify those inequalities under the law. And Tanya Plibersek in 2008 said, now same-sex couples have equality under the law. We do, in our country, have de facto relationships, and whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or a same-sex relationship, you've been living together for 2 years or more, you're considered a de facto couple, and the same laws apply regardless of whether you're in a same-sex relationship, heterosexual relationship. Of course, there are inequalities, I believe, between de facto couples and people who have a registered union. And I agree with Glenn that there should be a uniformity in relation to civil unions, and I would certainly think it would be proper to advocate for a national civil union register. But I did want to add that...
Well, you can't really because you're over a minute. We'll try and come back to you on that. There are plenty of questions to answer. We're going to come to Patrick Canduff, who's got the next question.
Hi. When I was younger, my mother and father separated. I live in two families. On one side of my family, I have two mums, lesbian parents. On the other side, I have a mother and a father, heterosexual parents. I move between houses. Unlike you, Karina, I've experienced both same-sex and opposite-sex families. Both my families are loving ones. From my position, experiencing both types of families, I can see that what matters is the love and support that I receive from both of them, not the form that comes in. Why can't you accept that?
I think contrary... I think you've misunderstood me, perhaps. I do accept that, and I really applaud that your families are working well and that you're in a loving family. That's so important. And I hope that, you know, everyone gets to experience love through a family relationship. So we're not in disagreement there. What we are, I suppose, in disagreement, what I take from your question, is that the question of marriage. And that's a different issue altogether. If we're talking about equality, well, there is equality under the law, and I think we can improve that for de facto couples. If we're talking about love,
can I just to quickly bring you up on something? So you're perfectly happy for children to be brought up with same-sex parents? That's no problem?
I don't see why. They're a good parent. Why not? Sorry. There are good parents who are heterosexual.
The problem with marriage is that it will lead to problems with children, that vulnerable children are threatened. I've read you saying this over and over, that one of the consequences you've spoken about is that if we pass through marriage, that then same-sex people will have children. That's what you've said, that's a consequence.
That's very different to parenting and being raised by same-sex parents. Absolutely. If I can, I might need more than a minute to explain this, because if there is...
I'm not that stupid, but...
No, because the reason being that there are good parents who are heterosexual and good parents who are same-sex attracted. Equally, there are bad parents who are heterosexual and bad parents who are same-sex attracted. But if we are introducing a new institution whereby same-sex people can get married, marriage is for founding a family, having a family, and what that means is that therefore there'd be rights for same-sex people to have children, and the only way to do that at present is through the use of assisted reproductive technology, and that raises issues
go back to
in terms
Patrick,
of a child's ability to know its biological parent.
Can we go back to Patrick, because he asked a question and he did have his hand up.
With the utmost respect, the Medical Journal of Australia released a report which said that kids are all right. For me, I just want to see my mums get married just as my dad did. What's wrong with that?
If I could answer,
go ahead.
The issue is not that I don't want to see your family being happy and I don't want to see your family having a loving relationship. I do. The reality is that when we're talking about love, you can't legislate for love. I think love is important in a family. When we're talking about equality, we should have equality under the law for everyone. We are in furious agreement about that.
But technically speaking, you can legislate who can get married, which is what this entire debate is about. You can actually legislate for marriage.
Could I ask, do you have the same issue with straight people who use IVF? Because 1 in 6 couples have a fertility issue. So are you going to dictate who can and can't have children? Not just gays.
I can't. The issue of the same-sex plebiscite is not up for me. It's
but you're interested in a career in politics.
Not for me.
Is that where you would be heading? If you have an issue with artificial reproductive technology, a great many of my friends, there are all sorts of arrangements, but frequently actually the children know the parents and are raised by all of the biological parents. So if you have an issue with IVF, is it just with gay people having IVF?
Magda, I'm going to leave that as a rhetorical question. We've got another question we're going to go to, which is on the same subjects, from Danielle Hewitt, and then we'll hear from the other panellists.
Hi, I'm a doctor training in developmental paediatrics, and as has already been said, increasingly in Australia, there are many children being raised outside of the traditional family structure from non-biological parents, including from sperm and egg donation, or with step-parents or with same-sex parents. And the body of research is quite clear that it's not knowing one's biological parents or the structure of the family that matters, and all those different structures can lead to good outcomes. So my question was, what would it take for the No campaign to stop insinuating that there is harm in other family structures and causing stigmatisation to those families?
Glenn Davies.
Thank you, Danielle. I think the main reason why I believe, and the No campaign believes, that marriage should stay between a man and woman is that the complementarity of the nurture that a father brings and the nurture that a mother brings. It's different. It's still equal, but it's a different kind of nurture. And having that relationship of the father and the mother for the child linking that with, now it's true, the biological mother and father, but that's, there's at Harvard University, the Grant study has demonstrated the importance of the father and the mother's distinct contribution to the nurture and care of the child. In terms of the biological nature, there's a deep-seated feeling for people, and you've seen it in terms of adopted children wanting to know who their biological parents are.
And they can.
And they can.
That's the law. They can. So no one's saying they can't know their parents.
And having a relationship with their parents and combining that with the mother and the father nurture is the reason why we have. It's not a matter of that same-sex couples can't love their children. No one denies that, and Patrick has given ample evidence of that.
Glenn, just a quick one, and it's sort of obvious really, but since this can already happen, why has this become part of the debate about same-sex marriage? Because it's already, everyone's acknowledging that it's
whether it's a yes
now.
or no, it will keep happening. You can't stop it by a no vote. It will keep happening.
With regard to same-sex couples and children, is that what you mean? Yes.
Yeah.
For me...
Now, why is it part about a debate about same-sex marriage at all, since it's already happening?
Because... Taking gender out of marriage has consequences which are far-ranging. And it's not a matter of just changing a few words in the Marriage Act. It's a very simplistic way of doing that, but it's disingenuous to actually think that there won't be other ramifications in our society as a whole. And that's been evidenced in the United States, Canada, Sweden, UK. And Karina, I think, has a list of possibilities where you've got those kind of consequences. I think that we'd be very foolish to go down this track without recognising what the consequence. So, for example, you take the Dean Smith bill. My minute's about up, isn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, I'm afraid it is. We'll come to that issue.
Okay, fine.
And Frank, we're going to hear from Frank Brennan on this, though.
Could I say, I think the state does have an interest in creating situations where, as much as possible, children are born and nurtured by their known biological mother and known biological father. But in addition to that, I think the state has an interest in respecting and nurturing those relationships of gay and lesbian people who have children, and to encourage that for the well-being of those children as much as possible. And I've come to the view, I don't think that undermines the first state interest, and I think society will remain pretty robust where most of the relationships we're talking about will be of a man and a woman who are attracted together and who come and bear and nurture each other's children. And as I understand it, gay couples say, wonderful. Most gay couples have actually come from such unions. But the question...
Just about all, yeah.
The question is, are we able to walk and chew gum at the same time? Namely, that we can continue to do that under the civil law, while at the same time according respect and recognition to those couples in a different situation.
Okay,
it's not like suddenly 50...
I'm sorry, we're going to have to get through a few more questions, Magda. We've got one on the gender issues from Jackie Yee. Go ahead.
Hello, my question goes to Magda.
Where are you? Sorry.
If same-sex marriage is legalised, gender becomes superfluous in a marriage. And therefore,
only for a small percent of gay people.
I think this
not for straight people.
This will impact the wider society as a whole in the way we view the roles of men and women. After all, marriages form families, families form communities, and society as a whole. Do you agree that the Yes campaign's push for change will lead to a far-reaching consequence to this debate and society as a whole by altering its view on men and women, not merely just a change to the Marriage Act 1961?
No, because exactly as Frank said, we're a really small percentage of the population. We're not asking 100% of the Australian population to enter into same-sex marriages. The other 90% will keep doing that. We are far outnumbered. You can't breed us out of existence because we actually do originate mostly from straight people. But there does seem to be a constant number of roughly 10% of same-sex attracted people. And it's not like there's an army of us who are going to take over. We just want to have the same rights and protections. I know that friends of mine have gone through excruciating times when they've tried to prove that their next of kin because of the various civil registration here, civil union there, all the different names. And they've had to have these excruciating conversations with bank managers after a divorce, with doctors, detailing the sexual arrangements that they have. The bank manager doesn't want to have that conversation. The people in the couple don't. It is for ease of and efficiency, and not putting people through that discomfort. But also, as I've said before, disease, death, divorce. It's those terrible times when you really need the protection, and that's a big part. Sorry.
Okay, we're not taking people.
I did answer the question. No, I don't think it will.
Magda, we're not taking questions, Jill, from the floor. Karina,
you answer the question.
Issues. Certainly, the issues that Magda raises about the differences in equality are ones that exist for de facto couples, whether they be same-sex de facto couples or heterosexual de facto couples. And I believe that there does need to be uniformity and that those laws need to be strengthened so that there are equal protections for whether you are in a de facto relationship or a registered relationship. There are, however, indeed consequences. And even Bill Shorten, sitting on this panel previously at Q&A, acknowledged that there are consequences. It is important that we recognise that if we're changing such an old institution, that can't be done without flow-on effects. And when we look to countries where same-sex marriage has been legalised, there are impacts on free speech, on religious freedom, on parental choice when it comes to what education and curriculum their children are exposed to.
Frank Brennan.
Well, following on from that, Karina, I mean, I don't know a lot about sex and marriage, but when it comes to human rights...
Do you know what you see?
Well, I know what I see, and I actually chaired the committee for the Rudd government in 2009, where we recommended a Human Rights Act, precisely because we thought there was a shortfall in Australia's laws regarding things like freedom of speech and religious freedom, etc. But guess what? Both sides of politics back then said we're not interested at this stage. So,
Frank, you're not trying to find a tricky way to get a human rights bill, are
no,
you, out of this? Because I know you've been advocating one for many years.
I know that's not likely to happen, Tony, and no, I'm not campaigning for that at all. But I do acknowledge there are questions about the legal architecture of Australia, but they have nothing to do with the debate, I think, about same-sex marriage.
OK, well, more on that is coming up. We've got a question from Veronica Morgan.
The Royal Commission into the institutional response to child sexual abuse has uncovered a shockingly high incidence of abuse and cover-up in many of this nation's religious institutions. Now, it seems to me that my children need protection from these institutions, not from me being able to marry my partner. Apart from the obvious hypocrisy in the claim that same-sex marriage should not be legalised in order to protect the children, shouldn't the Church be concentrating on trying to repair the damage caused to children in your care, rather than spend $1 million perpetuating misinformation and homophobia?
Davies.
Thank you, Veronica, for that question, and a very astute question. It is certainly true the Royal Commission has exposed the failures of the Church, and I'm appalled at the history of my own church, and I imagine Frank has the same feelings with regard to his church as well. I think that I've sat with people who have been victims of child sexual abuse and listened to their stories, and it's agonising to do so. And I'm appalled at the way in which some of my predecessors have managed that. We've learnt a lot over time, not just as Royal Commission. We've been, since the Wood Royal Commission in this state, for example, that was a wake-up call for us. So that's the issue for us, that we are seeking to address those matters in a sensitive and pastoral way. That's the end of my minute, so I can't...
Well, no, but I can... I'll follow up to give you 30 extra seconds.
30 seconds, right.
I suppose the question goes to this. Has the Church lost its moral authority to tell the country what it should think about the protection of children?
Well, the Church doesn't tell the country what to think. Okay, I'm an individual. I'm an individual, and as a citizen, I have a right to speak, and Christians have a right to speak, and they don't have more of a right to speak than anyone else, nor less of a right to speak. And what we want to do is we actually bring to the light what we believe marriage is. After all, from my point of view, it's God's idea, and Jesus' view of marriage is the view that I want to follow. That's how I come to the view that I come to, and I want to recommend that to the people of Australia. In fact, I'd rather have more people follow Jesus than even be concerned which way they're going to vote.
Can I just get something clear from the questioner's point of view? Are you actually making the case, a public case, that children will be endangered by same-sex marriage?
It's not the danger. I think that question is, shall I say, badly framed with regard to a danger. What I think is the best outcome for children is to be raised by their biological mother and father. That's what I consider to be the case.
Okay. Quickly go back to our questioner. Veronica had a hand up. Go ahead.
I do take issue with you saying that the church doesn't seek to control the way people think. I grew up in a Christian home, and I know very well how much control is affected on the people that are congregations by the church. So I really do struggle with this idea, and I do see it as being hypocritical, that the church, in your case, is claiming to defend the rights of children, and children exist in same-sex families, same-sex parented families, as we've already discovered and discussed. And I don't understand why you don't want to protect those children that currently exist in those families. Because currently what you're wanting to do is, firm up this difference.
OK, we'll let him answer that. Glenn.
So we certainly want to protect all children. All children are made in the image of God, regardless of their parenting arrangements. Every person, whether they're from the LGBTQI community or from the heterosexual community, are all made in the image of God. That's what makes them precious and very valuable, and I want to protect that.
But unequal, just saying.
No, they're not unequal. That's not true. They're not unequal. There's a difference. I mean, a man can't have a baby. Does that make him unequal to a woman who can have a baby?
OK. We're going to move on because we've got so many questions tonight. You're watching the Q&A same-sex marriage debate. There are other issues, of course. The government's national energy guarantee is on the table. And this Wednesday, Energy Minister Josh Frydenberg joins Q&A in the House. AM presenter Sabra Lane will put your questions to the Minister live in Parliament House. That's this Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time on Facebook Live. Go to our website or follow our Facebook page to ask a question to him. The next question on this subject comes from Gabrielle Haley.
My question is to Father Brennan. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your work in the areas of social justice and the promotion of human rights. You have been reported as saying that contemporary Catholics will no longer be bound by dogma they perceive to be outdated. Is this dogma the word of the living God, which states that a man shall leave his mother and father and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one? This has been the framework and basis for marriage for a very long time, and I want to understand how contemporary Catholics can view this verse in any other way. If it is dogma, is it really outdated? Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Frank Brennan.
Thanks, Gabriel. Well, we could spend an hour on that, but maybe to be brief in a minute. I think that one of the things we have to confront about this is we're not really so much talking about religious dogma. I mean, I keep fairly separate questions about my church's view of a sacramental marriage, as we would call it in our tradition. And then in the Catholic tradition, there's also a bit of a philosophical tradition about talking about the natural order. But I separate that out from the legal question that we're here looking at. And so, like in my own church, the vice president of our bishops' conference, insofar as hierarchy counts for anything, Archbishop Coleridge, and he's very theologically literate, much more than I am, he recently said, yes, Catholics can vote yes and they can vote no. And the question is, what are your reasons? So my reasons, as you've said, I'm a human rights lawyer. Yes, I'm a Catholic priest. I believe in my church in the dogma of the sacramentality of marriage. And yes, I believe that Magda cannot have a sacramental marriage in the Catholic Church. But equally, I, as a human rights lawyer, believe that she can have a civil marriage in Australia, and I actually think God would be happy with that. So that's the difference. Yes, there will be Catholics who will say, no, I would vote no to anything even about the civil law. But in terms of the question of the civil law, I just see it as quite a different question from that about the dogma within the church.
Now, Frank, you often hear this from Christians, and our questioner said this is the word of the living God. In actual fact, it's Matthew 19, and Jesus was talking about divorce, not marriage, but that statement was made. Do you just think that statement's outmoded now?
No, I don't think it's outmoded. I think it's still an integral statement in terms of those of us who are Christian and how we want to profess our lives according to the Scriptures. But am I in a position, or do I want to, or do I even think that Jesus or God would want to impose that on those who are not Christian? No, I don't. And I actually, as a Christian, living in a pluralist democratic society, say, I think the world is a better place when the law accords respect to all of these relationships and not just to some.
Okay, well, let's... As a non-religious person?
You can, but I do want to hear from both. It's fundamentally a religious question, so I want to hear from both of our religious authorities here, Glenn Davies, and then we'll go to Magda.
Well, Matthew 19, the question is about divorce, but Jesus answers the question about divorce in terms of a definition of marriage. And that's the important thing. So he actually is talking about marriage, and he takes it back to the beginning, to Genesis 2:24, with regard to what marriage is. I believe that Jesus' words continue to have power and influence and authority today until the Lord returns. And therefore, Jesus, if I'm in the end, I'm a churchman, I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'm bound and I delight in telling people about him and helping people to understand that God's good design for marriage is actually for all people. I suppose I differ here with regard to Frank. It's not just for Christians, like a sacramental marriage might be in their tradition, but rather marriage is God's design for all people because they're image bearers of God. Now, in that regard, I want to propose that to the Australian nation. I do not want to coerce. That's not my job.
Magda.
I just want to say I'm not a religious authority. I'm less of an atheist than people would think. 74.9% of people in Australia get married outside the church. Now, I accept that the church will never marry me. That grieves me in ways that you will never know. I'm the one in my family. When I buried my parents, I organised every detail of the requiem masses. I wrote the orders of service. I put the pall over my mother's coffin. Now, I accept that the Catholic Church will never marry me, but you won't even let me marry outside the church. Why is it your right to determine, fair enough, in your domain, you do what you like. We live in a live and let live society. I don't want to tell anyone else what to do. Why should you have the right to tell me in a civil, or any other person, straight or gay, what they do in the civil domain? Okay, that's not your domain.
Let's let him a brief response.
I don't think the views that I've expressed have been telling anyone what to believe. And I wouldn't tell you that either, OK? That's not my job. What I would like to say...
You paid $1 million to fund the No campaign, so I think that's... And not out of your personal money either. Like,
no, it was out of our personal money.
Your wages?
No, it comes out of the investment
coffers?
Funds. No,
okay.
It doesn't come out of
donations. I might be able to also have a say here.
I'm going to bring you in, but just a quick question.
Well,
was that donation tax deductible?
No, it comes out of our investment funds. It wasn't... look, you put your money where your mouth is. We believe in marriage. We're not going to just speak about it. We're going to say...
Karina wants to jump in. Go ahead.
We want to invest in our society.
All right, Karina.
I think what Frank was describing is equality under the law, and I think everyone on this panel, as I'm hearing it, agrees that there should be equality under the law. What is distinct is marriage. If we're talking about love, as I said before, you can't legislate for love. If we're talking about having a ceremony, a wedding ceremony, well, anyone can have that. There's no law to stop someone having a wedding ceremony. If we're talking about equal rights, well, people can register their relationships in most states, and yes, there is a discrepancy in that is not available in every state. And I think, like Glenn, that there should be a national register so that everyone can participate in that. But the same laws apply for de facto couples whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or a homosexual relationship. But I did want to go back to the previous questioner. Sorry about that, but I didn't get to jump in there. I did want to clarify something because when you phrased your question, you said something about vulnerable children, and I think that was taken from something that was put up on the Q&A website, that I had supposedly said that I'm no homophobe, but I am concerned about vulnerable children. I fear. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. I have never said that. I think that what is implied by that statement is that I have some kind of concerns that gay people might harm children. I do not. That has never entered into my consciousness, let alone for me to speak that out or to write that anywhere. That was a headline of an article. All I can say is Q&A, #factcheck.
OK, so just to confirm then, you actually have no problem whatsoever with gay people bringing up children?
No, I don't have any issue with gay people parenting. But only if they're married? No, I don't think that homosexual people should be married because when you...
No, but is the problem with them bringing up children only when they're married?
Sorry, I don't understand your...
Is it a problem, them bringing up children when they're married?
Sorry, I don't understand your question. Is it...
So there's no problem with people getting married if they're gay and bringing up children as far as you're concerned?
The reason, I suppose, why I don't understand your question is people bring up children all the time who are not married. OK. Whether they be straight or
I'm just confirming that's your view.
I don't have an issue with people parenting who are in a married relationship, in an unmarried relationship, straight, gay, whatever, so long as they're good parents.
OK, thank you. Now, the next question is from Jonathan Adams.
Yes, last Friday in The Guardian, commentator David Marr asserted that the undisclosed motivation for Christian opposition to same-sex marriage is, quote, contempt for homosexuality and, quote, profound hostility to the LGBTQI whose lives are in question here, unquote. Archbishop Davies, as a prominent church leader and a supporter of traditional marriage, how do you respond to these allegations?
Thank you. Jonathan, is it? Thank you, Jonathan, for that question. In previous generations, I think the LGBTI community did suffer badly at the hands of Christians. I think that is true, and I think we've acknowledged that. When the Orlando massacre took place last year in June, we held a service in the St Andrew's Cathedral, and at that service, and we invited the ambassador, the Prime Minister came, the Governor came, and I gave an apology to the LGBTQI community on that occasion because of the particular nature of that horrific massacre in the nightclub in Orlando. I did that deliberately and genuinely because as I said before, there's no hatred, and I would disagree with David Marr's report in that regard. There's no hatred from us to people who are different from us. The love that we have comes from the love of God, and I seek and encourage all Christians to love people, and people from the LGBTQI community are welcome in our churches. They send their children to our schools, and they are welcome. And I spoke to a person just last year with regard to that. Would my children be welcome? She was in a same-sex relationship, and I said, of course. And she told me this year, the children have been enrolled in the school and they're having a wonderful time.
Magda, what do you think about David Marr's suggestion?
About
what the real motivation is.
Well, you know, I'm just a bit perplexed, Karina, to go back to... I've read several articles talking about the fact-checking thing, saying that you have a concern about children not knowing their biological parents.
Yes, I do.
OK, so does that apply to straight people or just gay people?
To everyone. I think, well, the Article 7 and 8 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child does say that children do have a right to know their biological parents and to be raised by them and to know their genetic identity.
And they do have that right. And so would you be pushing for legislation to stop both gay and straight people from... Is that what you would be doing?
I don't think that's what we're debating tonight.
Well,
that's something that I haven't turned my mind to in terms of changing legislation to do with artificial reproductive technology. I suppose that's another night altogether.
Tonight, but I'll go to Frank Brennan because he wanted to get in there.
I just wanted to go back about David Marr's point. In terms of the Catholic Church, I would concede that I think David has a point. And I think that the problem in this whole debate is that I think institutional churches, particularly my own, have been playing catch-up in terms of contemporary understandings of sexuality. And I think part of it has been, in the Catholic Church, we have an institution called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. They published a number of documents between 1976 and 2003, which were very focused on the particular sexual acts and talking about homosexual condition being disordered. Now, in their defence, I don't think they'd say that anymore, but it's still there on the books. And I'm one of those Catholics who's delighted that we do have a very pastoral Pope at the moment, Francis, who says, "Who am I to judge?" Now, I think that communicates a whole new approach. We're not so much focused on acts or dispositions. We're looking at relationships. We're looking at how families live. And if we do that, then I think we've got a better way of moving forward and avoiding some of what people like David Marr, I think, rightly read as an antipathy.
So just very briefly on that, do you think that Pope Francis is making the point, who am I to judge whether or not same-sex marriage is legitimate?
Yes, I do. I know that he is...
speak for the Anglicans and speak for the Catholics.
I know that Pope Francis himself was opposed to same-sex marriage when he was the bishop in Buenos Aires, but as I understand it, he was supportive of the notion of civil unions. But that's no longer on the table, and for me as a Catholic, the question is, where do we go from here?
All right, now remember, if you hear any doubtful claims, you can check even that one if you like on Q&A. Let us know on Twitter. Keep an eye on the RMIT ABC Fact Check and the Conversation website for the results. The next question comes from Nikki Fortescue.
My question's for Frank Brennan. I'm a mother of 4 children who go to Christian schools. Well, one's finished at a Christian school. And my observation or understanding is that overseas, when same-sex marriage has been legalised, it has actually impacted the ability of Christian schools teaching a traditional Christian view of marriage. So how can I be assured that the schools that I've chosen for my children to go to are going to be protected, that they can retain their Christian ethos and their Christian teaching if the yes vote and if same-sex marriage is legalised?
Great. Well, my approach has been to say I haven't thought the plebiscite is the appropriate way to work that out, because these are complex legal questions which await resolution properly by our parliamentarians once the plebiscite is out of the way. And then the question becomes, do we have the appropriate legal architecture in place nationally for protecting all rights and freedoms? And that isn't just in relation to same-sex marriage. Now, I would imagine in relation to same-sex marriage, it's a bit like saying, like in my church, we have a strong moral teaching, as I know in Archbishop Glenn's, about abortion. Now, the law allows abortion. We still have a strong moral teaching about abortion. Are we free in our schools to teach what we think about the morality about abortion? Yes, we are. If we're proper educators, would we also be informing our students that the law actually permits this? Yes, we would. We would then ask the question, how do you think you should be acting morally? So, similarly, if there be a law which permits same-sex marriage, then I would think that we'd have to be, well, I would demand that we be free to teach that the civil law of Australia recognises same-sex marriage, but yes, in my church, we still have a teaching about the sacramentality of marriage.
Should it allow for churches to discriminate against homosexual couples in any way?
Well, already under the Sex Discrimination Act, you've got provisions which would only allow discrimination if it were something which were contrary to the teaching of the Church. Now, I think, and this is the really difficult area, in relation to a church as an employer, if you're going to start saying, oh, well, I wouldn't employ that person because they're in a same-sex marriage, the question would be, well, would you employ someone who is heterosexual, who was, say, in a civil marriage which wouldn't be recognised as a sacramental marriage in the Catholic Church? Now, I can't imagine religious authorities going into that sort of complexity.
Okay.
So I think over time...
I'm going to bring in Karina here because obviously you're concerned about these areas precisely.
I think the short answer to your question is that if same-sex marriage is legalised, no, Christian schools will not be immune from the consequences that flow from that. And we've seen that just last week when Theresa May in the UK said that one of her greatest achievements in her parliamentary career was legalising same-sex marriage. And the next step now is to ensure that there is LGBTI sex education in all schools, not just government schools, all schools.
Okay, Magda.
You said fact-checked. I did fact-check a couple of the claims that you've made. One of them was about the guy who's the prominent guy from Canada for the No campaign, and he said it's been sort of put forward that because he wouldn't accept teachings about gender and sex education, he was suing the school. Now, he had a 6-year-long battle going on, and his claims, his list of claims, included things like he didn't want his children to be exposed to what he called false teachings, which meant the mere idea that there were other sets of values that existed, anything to do with the environment, to do with astrology, which is in newspapers everywhere, and wizards, meaning that kids couldn't discuss. He wanted to be informed. It was not because of a difference of views, it was that it was unworkable. And one more thing, the other one I want, you mentioned the Jewish school in London. I fact-checked that because I actually went to the site of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, and they said that is inaccurate. Now, if you want to tell the Jews how to run Jewish schools, because we're talking about freedom of religion, it seems to me...
So just to confirm, this is a story about a Jewish school in the UK and the suggestion or allegation that it was being forced to shut down because they were refusing to teach gender diversity.
And I'm not saying that's inaccurate. The Executive Council of Australian Jewry is saying that that's inaccurate.
All right, we'll quickly throw that to Karina.
And the council are the only ones who say that that's inaccurate. Everyone else says that it is accurate. You can ask the school if you like. The inspectors' reports are on the internet. If you don't believe that it's true, have a look at the very reports that are provided by the inspectorate itself.
So you don't accept the word of the peak body of Australian Jewry?
It's inaccurate to say that they didn't face consequences as a result. The reality is that the inspector came, inspected the school, and they failed inspections after same-sex marriage was
I'm going to draw a line at this. People can fact-check.
I would ask
the fact-checkers will fact-check it.
And
many people will. Thank you very much.
The Jews fact-checked, but they don't know, apparently.
Please do.
Okay.
They're the only body that say that.
Now, we've got questioners that want to ask questions, and the next one's from Antoine.
This question's for Karina. In your speech to the National Press Club last month, you cited a case in the UK where an Orthodox Jewish school was threatened with closure because it didn't teach kids about tolerance and respect. I was teased at school for being faggy. They said I was a little too expressive with my hands. I spoke with a bit of a lisp. I liked fashion magazines. I got teased much, much more for looking gay than being Asian. Can't you see that by not raising awareness in class about gay people in society perpetuates the feeling of isolation that children have, like I did, in coming to terms with their sexuality?
I absolutely see that, and I absolutely agree that we should stop bullying for any attribute that somebody has. That's not appropriate in the classroom, not appropriate in any sphere of life. And I do think that children need a genuine anti-bullying program to stop and stamp out bullying, whether it be on the basis of someone's gender or their sexuality or their race or their hair colour or whatever the fact may be.
But not the Safe Schools program?
Not the Safe Schools program. No way. That is a radical gender theory program that I did want to check. I'm not seeing any kids in the audience, and it's, you know, past 9:30, so I'm hoping that there aren't any kids up watching. But the Coalition for Marriage's ad, which talked about the content of the Safe Schools program and was just merely putting that out in an ad, that just yesterday that ad was given an MA rating because it was deemed that the content that was taken directly out of the Safe Schools program was inappropriate for children under the age of 15. It was given an MA 15+ rating.
I'm just going to quickly
now
go back to
that material is taught to children as young as 11 or 12 from year 7.
Now, our questioner is shaking his head, so I'd just like to go back to him.
I think you're taking the Safe Schools program. There are fringes of that program which were inappropriate, definitely. But at the core, at the heart of that program was about teaching about tolerance and respect. That there are people that aren't heterosexual, but they're normal people. But yet we lose sight of that, and that's the problem here. And I think by saying no, you're saying yes to being treated differently for something that I can't change.
Now, I'm going to go to Magda here. No, sorry, I'm going to go to Magda here. Magda, it is interesting that this has become a central piece of a same-sex marriage.
It's what has me as a consenting adult marrying a person of the same sex got to do with the Safe Schools program. That's an education program, completely separate issue. I was concerned as well, so I asked for clarification from the Department of Education. They said it is absolutely not a sex education program. Now, if you want to argue it with them, argue it with them, and you can take that up with them.
Teaching kids about masturbation, teaching kids about sex toys, teaching kids about all these kinds of things, to me, is sex education.
There are claims that are made by a mother on social media. I asked, and they said categorically that is not taught. Now, if you have an issue with education, sex education, that is an issue that should absolutely, we're all on a journey with this. Parents should be discussing it with the schools, with the education department, but it has nothing to do with me. It is not part of an agenda.
That is an inaccurate characterisation. It's not just one mother, it's many, many
OK, all right, sorry, I'm just going to quickly go to Glenn Davies. Does this really have anything to do with whether or not there should be same-sex marriage?
Yes, I believe the consequences are greater than what people realise. And I think that the change in Ireland, for example, the change in Ireland after the referendum, they then changed all the exemptions with regard to in schooling, which were previously there. Within 6 months, that was done. In Sweden, for example, the Prime Minister of Sweden said to clergy generally, if you're not going to marry gay people, then find another job. And if you talk about homosexuality from the perspective of the Bible and that offends a homosexual person, that is seen as hate language and it's a criminal offence.
But you're the person that de-licensed a priest who dared to speak in favour of same-sex marriage, and you're protected by religious exemptions. You did that. This is not what might happen. You did it.
That's not true.
Isn't it?
No, it's not true.
Explain why. How?
Well, because it's not true. How do I explain what's not true?
Did you de-license?
No, I did not de-license.
OK, we've got a question, we've got a denial, we've got time for one last question.
Try fact check.
We've got, I said at the beginning that fact checkers are going to be busy.
Try having excessive religious exemptions when ordinary citizens don't.
I'm happy to explain to you what happened.
OK, we can talk about that in the green room. Now, Graham Marks has a question for us. It's the last one we have for the program.
My question is for each of the members of the panel. Will you accept the result of the postal survey as being what the Australian public want, or will you continue to pursue your particular view on the campaign?
Karina, start with you.
I think it is important, and what has been brought up through this campaign is that there is a need to acknowledge that freedom of religion, free speech, parental choice will be impacted if same-sex marriage is legalised. The question is Australia happy with that? Are we okay that there will be a loss in free speech, that there will be a loss in religious freedom? That is the question. I think also...
But just very briefly, because we are going to run out of time, the questioner asks, will you give up campaigning on same-sex marriage if the plebiscite is overwhelmingly yes?
In my view, there is never any piece of legislation that can guarantee that religious freedom, free speech, parental choice would be protected.
So the answer is you'll keep campaigning no matter what the result?
What I will be campaigning for, though, is that there be the strongest protections possible included in legislation, although inevitably those we see are watered down over time. And even in Sweden...
OK, no, we're not going to go through the Swedish case. It's too long. Frank.
Well, I'd just be saying I want the politicians to get on and do their job. I do... Now, as I've said, I think there are some issues to do with freedom of religion or whatever, but they're not related directly to same-sex marriage. But this issue has highlighted that there are shortfalls in the legal architecture we have. And I'd say, you know, some of the provisions that are there in the Victorian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, well, why not have them at a federal level? Because they work in Victoria, put them at a national level.
Glenn, will you accept the results of the postal survey?
I met with some religious leaders with the Prime Minister 18 months ago, and when it was a plebiscite was on the table at the time, and I spoke on behalf of the leaders, and we're all in agreement that if the plebiscite said yes to same-sex marriage, then we would recognise that would become the law of the land. Okay, so that is we live in a democracy, and people are allowed to express their points of view. And in a democratic situation, we're going for this survey, for then the parliamentarians will make their decision one way or the other. However, I won't stop saying what Jesus defines marriage to be and how God has designed marriage. I trust, I'd be prepared to go to jail necessarily in order.
I'm not 100% sure whether people are applauding just because you might...
They may be applauding, well, go to jail quickly, yes, I understand.
I doubt it. Let's go ahead.
So that I have an opportunity and a right as a citizen in this country which loves free speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of belief, so that I can actually say what I believe, even though the law might be different, whether it be abortion or whether it be same-sex marriage or euthanasia, if Victoria was to go down that, in my view, foolish track, then we would be in that situation. So we will accept what the people say because we believe in democracy.
Magda.
What you said, but the opposite. You know, if it comes through as a no vote, I also love what Frank said. I'm in a very difficult position here. 50 years ago, we had a referendum as to whether about Aboriginal people. Would you have sat there and said to an Aboriginal person, do you accept that vote? So I'm put in an extremely difficult position here. If the will of the people changes over time, there are a lot of younger people who have a very, very different attitude. So I will be keeping a very close eye on how the social attitudes are changing. And also similarly, because I believe fundamentally in my bones that you cannot set a precedent where 10% of the population are less equal than others, I will continue to try and, if I can somehow get people to understand what it is like for me and other LGBTQI people, how profoundly insulting it is to be told that you're lesser than and to be reminded on an institutional basis constantly. And I think that unfortunately a lot of this bringing in of other issues that are completely unrelated have made people nervous about this. So, you know, I'll be very sad if it comes through as a no vote.
Sure.
But you know, can I agree to live in a country where there's, you know, equality for some, more equality for some than for others? Then I would really struggle with that, and I would die in a ditch for my friend as well. Don't you worry about that.
All right. Now, Thank you very much to our panel and to our questioners for a civil debate. That's all we wanted. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Archbishop Glenn Davies, Magda Szubanski, Karina Okotel and Father Frank Brennan. Remember, you can continue the discussion on Q&A Extra with Tracy Holmes and philosopher Matthew Beard of the Ethics Centre. They're taking comments on ABC News Radio and Facebook Live as soon as we finish here. Next week on Q&A, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. First part of his autobiography is out tomorrow, and if there's another part, that part's very big, so I can't imagine how big the next one will be. And on Monday, he'll be facing your questions and the challenging views of outspoken Conservative broadcaster and Rudd critic Alan Jones, political journalist and essayist Laura Tingle, and political historian Judith Brett. So can't wait for that one. Until next week's Q&A, good night.